So you all know probably very well by now what Drutakarma Prabhu is doing as his main service. I don't. I have some idea, but all the details on this, because he's been speaking about that for the last 2 days. I'm going to get you're going to get that for me. You're going to give me the transcript of that Bengali pronunciation thing, and you can send me the transcript of those 2 talks also. Is that okay? So it's a unique service, and seems it's been very interesting to everyone, because it's really out there among all the representatives of the main atheistic force in the world, which is that of the scientists who are busy collecting so-called evidence, which all leads to the point that there's no soul and there's no God. Now, as Drutakarma Prabhu will insist, our real evidence is Shastra. But we're raised in this society to think that science is authoritative and Shastra is just some mumbo-jumbo by some primitive cavemen with no relevance on anything of any real veracity. So what Drutakarma Prabhu is doing is using their own system, their own knowledge system to show. Anyway, you can explain it better than me. But I'm just trying to make the point that it's exciting to us because it's right on the front line, and it's beating them at their own game as well as you can, because they've what do they call that? They've rigged the system. And we may have doubts ourselves. It says in Shastra so many things, but the life, humans on this, intelligent humans going back millions of years, but he's showing all the proofs. So without further ado, you've already been talking about it, but as I said, I haven't heard it, so we'll be happy to hear it again. What is the nature of your service, actually?
Yeah, I can hold it. Yeah, well, the nature of my service has to do with the fact that I came to the Krishna consciousness movement with a desire to serve Krishna by writing. And one of my early temple presidents told me, "You want to write? That's good." Srila Prabhupada writes, Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, but it has to be done in a mood of service. So he advised me, take up some service in the temple, and in your spare time, write articles for Back to Godhead magazine and send them in. So I followed his advice. I was an assistant temple treasurer in the Miami temple. And I did my service during the day, and in the evenings I would try to write an article for Back to Godhead magazine. And in those days there was no email, so I'd type it out.
No computers. No personal computers either.
Yeah, put it in an envelope and send it to Los Angeles to Back to Godhead magazine.
And then, if you don't mind me interrupting, some of those articles, they were really, really top notch. And I particularly remember one.
Myth of the Innocent Citizen.
Which one?
myth of the innocent
Yeah,
citizen.
right. Did I tell you before? I'm really impressed by that, or have others told you that? The myth of the innocent citizen. Do you want to get it up and read the first few paragraphs? It's really classic. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No problem.
it's really this is at the time of Ronald Reagan, and I think Brezhnev was still in power. Yeah, and there was this feeling all over the Western world that it's only a matter of time before one of them pushes the button first, and we're all going to get fried, literally, by nuclear war.
Yeah, but the point was, it's not just the leaders who are responsible.
Why can't Ronnie and, what was his first name, Leonid, get together and sort it all out? And
Yeah,
exploding the myth of the innocent citizen. Yeah, shall I read it? Just a few paragraphs. The opening is really a classic. East and West, bad karma is building to a critical mass and catastrophe, by Drutakarma Das. Catching many political leaders unaware, nuclear disarmament has once more surfaced. This is the 1980s, early 1980s. Once more surfaced as a major public issue. From Vermont to California, a dozen state legislators have sponsored nuclear freeze resolutions. The latest New York Times CBS poll shows that more than 70% of all Americans favor an immediate halt in the production of nuclear weapons, and anti-nuke demonstrations in Europe threaten the NATO alliance. Even the communist countries are not immune to the upheaval. So what's new about all this? Haven't the dire predictions of nuclear holocaust and the patient, reasoned pleadings for peace been echoing ever since the nuclear age dawned with ghastly suddenness at Hiroshima? Can we really expect that another UN conference, another summit meeting, another round of grassroots demonstrations will cause nuclear weapons to vanish? A lot of people seem to think so. And one thing they're very good at is educating the public about the details of nuclear war. Official-looking maps with neatly drawn concentric circles appearing lately in that means the concentric circles means the bomb drops here, and the concentric circle is the explosion area. Appearing lately in local newspapers and national news magazines show the effects emanating from a ground zero of a 20 megaton airburst over your hometown in capital letters. 20 megatons means a blast equivalent to the explosion of 20 million tons of TNT. Both the US and the USSR have thousands of such weapons in their nuclear stockpiles. There are some 50,000 nuclear warheads on Earth with an explosive yield 1.6 million times that of the antique bomb dropped on Hiroshima. And these are in the days before the internet, so you had to do all your research by going in libraries, I guess, and reading magazines. If a 20 megaton bomb exploded above a major US city, well, there's the point. Yeah, it goes on. Kill 50%, and it goes on. It's pretty grotesque. And the world's it tells all the nasty things that happens. The world's religious leaders are out there too. The Pope, Catholic bishops, Methodist ministers, Buddhist monks, and astute politicians picking up their constituents' vibes are scrambling onto the anti-nuke bandwagon, and the doctors, and the scientists, and the lawyers, and the movie stars, and the rock musicians. Everyone's wailing about the irrationality of the national leaders, the big bad guys with their grubby fingers on the buttons, who for the sake of national pride and prestige are ready to invoke the full horrors of nuclear Armageddon upon millions of innocent citizens. At last, we arrive at the central myth of the whole nuclear disarmament movement, the myth of the innocent citizen. These hordes of innocent citizens surmise if they can just get Ronnie and Leonid to sit down together, Ronald Reagan and Leonid Brezhnev, these two could sign some papers, shake hands, and solve the whole thing. The US and the Soviet Union could bury this nuclear hatchet. It all sounds quite sane and rational, but it's based on a faulty analysis of the whole problem. The truth is neither the US nor the USSR is a free agent. They are both acting under the influence of the inescapable law of karma. And it goes on to say how the innocent citizens, it's brilliant anyway, about the law of karma. When we're coming down, when we properly understand the law of karma, we can just see how the neighborhood McDonald's hamburger stand has much more to do with nuclear war than Reagan and Brezhnev. If you think the descriptions of nuclear war are terrifying, you should read the descriptions of what goes on inside the world's heavily automated slaughterhouses. And it goes on. Really tremendous, inspired, to the point. Yeah, so sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, but I didn't start like that. As I was saying, when I was in the Miami temple, I would be sending articles Back to Godhead magazine. They'd send them back. Sorry, we can't use this. And then I would write another one and send it in. They said, sorry, we can't use it. And I sent another, sorry, we can't use it. So finally they called the Miami temple and said, we'd like to bring you to Los Angeles to be trained as a writer for the magazine because we can see you don't give up. Yeah, so I got the permission of the temple president to go after the Christmas marathon. And I went, and the first things I was writing were not articles with a byline, your name on it. I would write the captions of the pictures, the table of contents of the magazine, all these things that are done anonymously with
apprenticeship. Oh, one thing we should say also, these are the days of mass distribution of BTG. This was written for the public. The myth of the innocent citizen. It was going out to all the innocent citizens.
Yeah, that would. Yeah, in those days they were distributing a million magazines a month.
Mostly in the United States.
But, like you were saying, you appreciated the article, and leaders did as well. You know, the BBT trustees. So they thought, okay, now what service can we engage our writer devotee in? And you were mentioning the other day, I worked with Mukunda Maharaj and a couple of other devotees.
Bhutatma was there?
Bhutatma was one of them. To produce the series of small books, Chant and Be Happy, Higher Taste, Coming Back, Science of Reincarnation. And they could see in their words that I was good at expressing the philosophy in a relatable way to people, sometimes very complex ideas. So then in 1984, they had the idea that I could be kind of like a step-down transformer for Sadhaputta Prabhu. And we produced a publication for the BBT meant for mass distribution, the Origins magazine.
Oh, yeah, great.
In which we gave succinct descriptions of our position on different scientific questions. And the way that I approached that is because I personally am not a scientist. Growing up, I wasn't particularly interested in the sciences. I was more interested in art, literature, poetry, things like that. And also politics, international politics. So,
big questions about the Big Bang. That was one of the articles in the Origins magazine.
That's true. And then we decided to turn all the different parts of that magazine into books, and I was given the archaeology topic to work on. So that's how I became involved in that. And I just took it as a challenge. You know, I kind of respond to that. Okay, we want to try to do something with this. Nobody's done anything with it before in our movement. You're like a pioneer. So let's try to, I just took it, as I said, as a challenge. You know, how can I do something with this writing project that might have some impact somehow or other? So that's how I approached it. It wasn't that and I'm not saying that the way I did things is the way to do it. I look at myself as an individual devotee who came into the contact with the Krishna consciousness movement and at a certain era. And in the 1970s, there weren't many devotees involved in scientific and academic work. There were only 2, 3. And it was a whole just unexplored new field. If when I was writing that book, I asked Sadhguru Prabhu, should I get a PhD in archaeology? You know, like it was a time when many devotees who had been in universities were going back, finishing up their degrees and things. So he said, no, the work will stand on its own 2 feet. And but I would say my main period of activity with that was from the time Forbidden Archaeology was published in 1993, you know, maybe for about, you know, until 2013, somewhere around there, was extensively traveling around the world, including your place in Salem, lecturing sometimes 5 or 6 universities a day, doing things like that. Now things have slowed down a little bit, but it's kind of like being, you know, if somebody had a record during the 1980s or 90s that was popular, they're still touring around today, even though I would say in our Krishna consciousness movement, there are many devotees whose names you don't know who are doing tremendous work in advancing the goals of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. Somehow I got a little notoriety at a certain era in our movement, and the notoriety continues a little bit inside of our movement. But like I said,
and beyond also.
Yes. Of course, we're speaking here with devotees, members of the Krishna consciousness movement in one fashion or another in disciplic succession. And it's just, to me, you know, the lesson is, I mean, everything I've done has been based on me being asked by some genuine authority in our movement to do something. Like when I was asked to work with Sadhguru Prabhu, I didn't have to do it. But I thought, I know Srila Prabhupada wants this done. It's something that I feel I have some contribution to make. So let me do it. And I've based my whole life on that principle of if there's something I can do to help spread the Krishna consciousness movement, whether it results in name and fame or not, just let me do my little bit somehow or other.
You were working obviously very closely with Sadhaputaru, that huge book, Forbidden Archaeology. He came up with most of the material and you organized it, or how did it work out?
Well, in the introduction to the book, I explained that process because at the time, many devotees might have thought, well, he wrote it, I kind of edited it or something. But the way it actually worked is as I said, we kind of jointly, the BBT, myself, and Sadhaputta Prabhu, came up with the idea of following up the Origins magazine with books based on it. And as I said, I was given the archaeology topic to work on. So I started getting into the research. It was given to me as a project, So I didn't know how long it would take. There were a few interesting cases that were mentioned in Origins magazine. So that was kind of like a foundation. And then I decided to start looking into the history of archaeology to see what else might be there. And as I started looking into the history of archaeology, I found that many archaeologists and geologists were reporting discoveries showing the existence of human beings going way back in time. And I started collecting the reports, and many cases they were not in English, they were in other European languages. So I have a knowledge of some of the European languages, so we translate them and collect them, and it went on for 8 years. So when the manuscript was finished, of course, I gave it to Sadhaputta Prabhu to review, and he had some comments and suggestions. And also, we were discussing it every day ourselves. He more or less convinced me. In the very beginning of my relationship with him, I questioned him, why do we have to get into the details, the nitty-gritty of these scientific ideas? Can't we just say, you got imperfect mind, imperfect senses, so nothing you say is to be taken seriously? And he convinced me that Srila Prabhupada wanted the Bhaktivedanta Institute to be able to deal with the scientific community in their terms. They want to have projection anumana. Well, here's some projection anumana that doesn't agree with what your conclusions are. So I kind of took it as a challenge, as I said. I wanted to show that, well, yes, this can be done. And that was kind of how that book came about. But undeniably, he was my mentor in science and Krishna consciousness. The way I approached the writing of the Origins magazine was to sit with Sadhaputta for hours and hours at a time, for days and days, few weeks questioning him about each topic, getting his take on it. It was like a crash course in science and Krishna consciousness. And he once told me that the work I did on forbidden archaeology was like doing a doctoral thesis with him as advisor. So
it's much bigger than an average doctoral thesis. It's a huge tome.
Yeah.
You must remember, these are the days before the internet, so you must have been in the public libraries a lot and searching for things.
Yeah, it's the type of research that was done then, it'd be like I was in the Los Angeles temple and the San Diego temple, mostly the San Diego temple when I was involved in doing the research and writing. And fortunately there were students, from different universities who had the privilege of getting documents by interlibrary loan. So that was the old system. Now a lot of this stuff is digitized and you can find it on the web. Not everything, but a lot of it is now available in digital form. But we had to physically get books through the interlibrary loan system, because these are kind of rare books and publications in different institutions around the world. Sometimes you have to write to Oxford University or Stanford University, and the students would do that and bring the books, and then we take what we needed from them and then send them back. So it was a different age.
Did you seek feedback from mainstream archaeologists and geologists as you were putting the book together?
Not so much when we were putting it together, but it did go through a review process. I met one anthropologist from a university in San Diego, and he wrote he became very impressed with what we were doing, because we're talking about things like knowledge filtration and things like that, which at the time was kind of cutting edge work in academic circles.
Did you coin that term, or was it already out there?
As far as I know, I coined it.
And it's out there now?
Yeah. Or like forbidden archaeology is out there now. It's like it became a generic topic. There are forbidden archeology conferences.
And you must be invited. You're
No.
No.
It's really pretty amazing. But
you must be known within the field as the founding father or something like that.
Well, yeah, it happened with so many different products, copying machines. There was one of the original ones that was put out by Xerox.
And they became known as Xeroxes.
Yeah, became known as Xeroxes. So, the name comes from a title I thought of. It's one thing I've always liked is making catchy titles. I like two words.
Coming back, yeah.
Coming back, forbidden archaeology, human devolution. of chant and be happy. That's Prabhupada's statement, but we took that as the title. Higher taste. I like 2 words.
So there is a whole field out there. Tell us more about that.
A whole field in the sense
of
of
forbidden archaeology studies.
Oh yeah.
Is it at all mainstream? Are there any mainstream universities which have courses on alternative archaeology or anything like that?
Well, they sometimes have them to inoculate students against it.
It's a sign of success.
They invent terms like fringe archaeology or things like that.
French archaeology?
Fringe on the edges, or pseudo.
Yeah, that's a favorite
archaeology. There's, but within the academic world and among archaeologists, there are some who are open to exploring new ideas. Like one group I call the Archeology group, singular. They have the idea that there's one scientific objective science of archaeology, and they've got it pretty much figured out. Still working on expanding it, but they think they have the basic outlines of it, and they're not interested in anything else. But there's also the Archeology's group, which accepts that there can be different perspectives on archaeology based on different source materials. Like there could be, for example, a Vedic archaeology based on another knowledge tradition. And that kind of offered an opening to get papers accepted at mainstream conferences, to get invitations to speak at leading scientific institutions around the world, like the Royal Institution in London, the Russian Academy of Sciences, different institutions like that. So, there is a community out there, even within the mainstream circles, that will listen to different perspectives on their discipline. And I kind of took advantage of the fact that we are offering something they haven't heard. Because normally when they think of any alternative view, it's either completely from people beyond the fringe even, that they have very little respect for, or it comes from Christian sources. So they said, like in some of the reviews when Forbidden Archaeology first came out, you had scientists writing reviews, and that is significant, because if they thought it was just completely bonkers, they wouldn't write about it. But they did write about it, and they were saying things like, "We've never seen anything like this before." It's seems a little creationist, but it's completely different in quality, being well researched, well written, and and it was coming from some place they didn't expect.
The Hare Krishnas. They know you're upfront about that, right? About being a member of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness.
Yeah. Well, once I had seen a devotee involved in this kind of work give a lecture at a university, and he made no mention of his connection with the Krishna consciousness movement, Srila Prabhupada, everything. So he gave his talk, and when the questions came, it was, who are you? What do you represent? Who do you work for? It was all like, so I decided I don't want to be in that position. I want to talk about the issues. So I say I'm offering a perspective on this archaeology or some other topic that I might be dealing with. And I'm doing it from a Vedic perspective. And just put that right out in front.
Right, I've seen, yeah.
And then that's off the table. You can think what you want about it, but it's off the table. I'm not hiding anything or concealing anything. And then any conversation would be about what I was saying in terms of evidence and things like that. Now, you also have to consider the fact that I was going into this without any credentials.
And Sariputta Prabhu was right, that the work stands on its own merit.
Yeah. And nobody ever, at least to my face, never brought it up. It's kind of interesting. But as I said, now, as I said, I was kind of active at a certain time in the history of our Krishna consciousness movement when I did all these things. We're talking about things that happened 20, 30 years ago, basically. So things kind of move on in our movement and in the world in general. And a new generation of devotee scholars, academics, and scientists with the proper credentials are coming to the fore. And I wouldn't expect them to do things the way I did them. I created a certain, identity as a devotee researcher, coming from a different knowledge tradition, and it had some impact, and maybe even continues to have impact. But devotees can do things in different ways. And I think, and I do know examples of devotees who are in archaeology, and they can't be like me, kind of like a bomb thrower and a sensation-making type of activity. That has some impact, but sometimes working within a system and still being devotionally motivated and desiring to do something, they may not be able to make big explosive statements, but they can try to move things in a positive direction. And sometimes they can both go on in parallel. The really in-your-face type of outreach, along with a more subtle insider type of activity. That can, I think that's possible. It's like a country might be at war or something like that, and it has its external forces, but it also has people doing diplomatic work, intelligence work, infiltration work, things like that. So,
but looking from the outside, it seems to me that as soon as whoever you may be, as soon as you clearly defy the orthodoxy, you're rejected from the orthodoxy. A prime example of that is Fred Hoyle in the astronomy field. When he rejected Big Bang, he was the biggest in the world practically. He was the head of the Royal Society, knighted, and but when he said, well, this Big Bang, he coined the term Big Bang as a pejorative term. It's like saying it's nonsense, the idea. But then he was out. They think he was just thrown out. And there are others also, big scientists. Rupert Sheldrake in his, he's old.
More for genetic fields.
Yeah, well, he's Cambridge professor, but he's advocating that science is stuck in it. Well, many scientists are saying stuck in in boxes in various fields. Basically, why don't we investigate things like parapsychology, premonition? And he's done experiments and shown that these are phenomena which they can be experimented upon, and shown that, at least in tentative experiments, there seems to be something there. But then he's just considered a crank, and he's rejected from the orthodoxy. Whereas if you're within science, you can say all kinds of wild things, really wild things, and as long as you're within certain boundaries, like within cosmology and string theory and all kinds of wild ideas, but as long as you're generally within their box, it's okay. I'd like to comment on that. I'm just questioning how far can you go with this infiltration approach, because it seems that there are certain boundaries which you can't cross, and then everything you do and say, however valid it may be from an objective stance, is just then you're just a crank and you're out, according to the orthodoxy. I'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, well, that's part of what I call the knowledge filtering that goes on. In other words, there's a social aspect to things. There's actually a whole field called sociology of science, where sociologists have looked at the scientific community and how it operates, and its processes of inclusion and exclusion. That's
been going on since Max Planck, I guess. He said, or is it science progresses one funeral at a time? When the old scientists die out, and then Thomas Kuhn, he wrote his famous book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, more saying the same thing. The old scientists, they won't agree to change their minds, but then another generation comes up. I often give the example that when I was at school, we were taught that the simplest living organism, simplest living cell, is very simple, and very soon we'll be able to replicate it in the laboratories. And then about 20 years later, I found out that that's not true at all. It's so complex that people who are studying these things think it must be designed. Famously, Michael Behe wrote Darwin's Black Box based on, as a microbiologist, he saw the cells. They're so complex, it couldn't have come into being simply by random, unguided natural forces. But then later I thought that even when they were teaching it at school, they must have already known that, because it takes time to change the textbooks, and then you have to re-educate a whole generation of teachers, so they just let it go on. But what do you see what's going on in the world? There's a whole big field, at least on the internet and YouTube, of what the scientific orthodoxy calls pseudoscience. But it's catching the attention of many people in many fields, in astronomy, and some of it may be wacko, like some of the stuff in regular science also. Flat Earth theory, never went to the moon, Prabhupada, he told us that. And then there's ancient history of civilized man is going, which debunks the whole neo-Darwinian evolutionary theories. And then, all fields of premonition, telepathy, extrasensory perception, all this kind. So all kinds of fields, and it's quite big. If you see the YouTube hits for all these, so there seems to be a widespread distrust of mainstream science. Oh, and of course in medicine, a lot of people. In Ireland, I had some problem. I went to a hospital in Northern Ireland. This is a few years ago, and then they give you free medicine there in Britain, National Health Service. But they said, are you going to take it? Because there's no point use to give it unless you'll take. So they're used to people not taking the medicine because they don't trust it. Vaccines, there's so much distrust of doctors. Figures are coming out that one of the main causes of death in America is going to hospital. There's several 100,000 people a year killed by wrong operations or botched operations. So what do you think about that? There is a whole. It's not just the Krishnas, right? There are a whole bunch of. They tell you these genetically modified foods are perfectly good for health, but a huge number of people don't believe that at all. And they won't touch. The whole organic food thing came out not thanks to mainstream science, but due to distrust of what they tell us. It's all very safe. There's pesticides. It's within acceptable levels, and a lot of people say, I don't want any level.
Well, of course, there are huge numbers of topics on the internet that we can pursue. But to me, everything comes back to Shastra and what it means for Krishna consciousness. Yeah. Say, why would I get into the topic of human antiquity? Does it really make any difference to my advancement in Krishna consciousness whether the first human beings appeared 100,000 or 100 million years ago? Is that the essence? Well, the way I look at it as a devotee is that what does Shastra say? And in Shastra, in the Puranas and the other texts, they contain these histories, and they say the species, the human species, is the most valuable kind of vehicle for a soul, a jiva soul to occupy. So it seems natural to suppose that if the universe has a purpose, which according to Shastra it does, it's there to give an opportunity for souls to qualify themselves to go to the spiritual world, then it's worth trying to show that. And plus, I consider, do our acharyas want this sort of thing? And as far as I can tell, Srila Prabhupada did. So that's kind of how I evaluate things. Trace it back to its roots in Shastra. If there's no root in Shastra or nothing that really helps me or other people in their advancement in the real purpose of life, self-realization and God-realization, then there's no sense in getting into it.
Right. But it's creating, cumulatively, there's an atmosphere being created of distrust in what the establishment says. Because our message, or as we've received it from Srila Prabhupada, is that your sources of knowledge, or what you think is knowledge, is all wrong. And this is the real source of knowledge, Shastra. So some of the things stated in Shastra, like human antiquity goes back millions of years, actually since the beginning of the universe. So, and if that's demonstrated using their own tools of observation, and then we say, hey, look, there's nothing new. This is right in the Shastras, right here. And you maybe find that in your book distribution also, that you show people that this tells about human society going back millions of years. It depends on who you're distributing books to, and people, it's something which interests them because they also have the feeling that, which I got from a very young age, that what we're being taught in the school is all cheating and bogus. So, and it resonates with that, and it's something which is ancient. It's not just something which someone made up. It's consistent. It's coming down over generations and generations and generations.
Well, another point is that it doesn't stop with archaeology, because that leads to the question, okay, you have this archaeological evidence, discoveries that go beyond what the mainstream consensus is and puts a human presence back so many years, millions of years. Well, so what? Well, what it means is that we need new understandings of human origins. But before we even ask the question, where did human beings come from, and how long have they been here, we need to understand what a human being is. And the scientists today will say we're just machines made of molecules. But if we really carefully study the whole matter, we'll see that there's more involved than ordinary matter. There's a subtle mind element that has unusual powers like remote viewing, and there's evidence for a conscious self that can exist apart from the body, apart from the brain. And that leads people, from the stones and bones, very quickly you're into consciousness and what is its origin and what is it meant for, and it takes you very close to Bhagavad Gita and the insights of the Vedic literature. about a consciousness-based cosmos rather than a matter-based cosmos. And that has implications for examining our goals and purposes in life. And, if you look at things in one way, the way that's very prominent today, you wind up with a world like the one we're living in. But if you look at things from another angle of vision, which we're providing in our literature, you wind up with a different set of values and goals and a different type of civilization and social organization and political organization. You wind up with a whole different set of institutions. So it has these questions. I mean, ultimately it comes down to what knowing about a particular topic contributes to your fulfilling the real purpose of human life. I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to for me. What does a person get from, say, forbidden archaeology? Well, as you were putting it, they may get, well, this will decrease their faith in the conclusions and everything that follows from those conclusions that they're getting through the education system and the scientists. So these things are not of interest to me, like that I have some intrinsic connection with stones and bones. That's not my purpose, is to get people looking for stones and bones. Like them to look, I mean, ultimately the purpose is, and it may take some time to get to that, but to get to, the real self and what's necessary to have that understanding of the self in relation to the Supreme Self, Krishna.
So it's creating an atmosphere and on the macro level within society, the idea is to gradually change the whole way of the whole worldview. But individually also, do you have cases of people who have inquired from you then, and you've been able to directly preach Krishna consciousness to them?
To some extent, yes. Sometimes I find out about it, not immediately, but decades after. I go around, for decades I've been going around to universities and temples and other places, scientific conferences, speaking, and you could ask yourself, or I could ask myself, what is the result of it? And sometimes, I run into a devotee who is, say, involved in scientific work now and is connecting with Bhaktivedanta Institute and making some big contribution, some major contribution to its work. And say to me, I remember when you came to my university, some IIT or NIT, 30 years ago or 20 years ago, and it really inspired me and my Krishna consciousness. So I have people telling me that, things similar to that by reading these books, it increased their faith. So that's interesting. And then among others, I would get letters from students of archaeology, telling me, things like, I was on an excavation with my professor, and I just happened to mention to my professor, maybe humans have been around a lot longer than we think. And, they, this one student wrote to me, he said it like that to his professor, and his professor said, I've got a book you should read.
You should read.
Yeah, should. Gave him his personal copy of Forbidden Archaeology.
Wow. So he's within the institution, within the orthodoxy, but for his tenure he has to go on teaching what they say. But he himself, after reading that book,
after just suggesting to his...
Yeah, and he could lose his tenure maybe if that could be made an issue of. So that's really, you see how, it's a big deal, yeah.
Well, it was kind of what I was hoping for when the book came out, or as I was writing it and researching it. I was hoping it would become something that would start circulating sort of underground, that things exactly like that would happen, that a professor would get it, read it, just not speak about it, but when a student showed some interest in the general topic, say, hey, here's something you should look at.
I remember a devotee in Russia told me once he'd met a member of the Orthodox Church there, and he said that all our priests and monks, they're all secretly reading your books.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to say openly, but it's everyone has their own personal secret, and sometimes they share it with someone else, that I'm reading these books. They're not allowed to do it openly.
Yeah. And another way I look at the impact is when I started this project that became kind of a career for me in devotional service. In the academic literature on human origins, you find no mention of any Vedic perspective or anything. And then when Forbidden Archaeology came out, I sent it to all the major international scientific journals that deal with human origins. And then all of a sudden, that literature is full of references to Bhaktivedanta Institute, the Vedas, the Puranas.
In what context did they put these mentions?
Well, for example, there was a historian of science, David Oldroyd, who was originally from England, I think, but was in Australia at a university there, and his graduate student, they wrote to me and they said they wanted to write a major review of Forbidden Archaeology for Social Studies of Science. It's a
That's
big
very
international
interesting. They
journal.
can study it within the orthodoxy. They can study that. Yeah. Do you get the angle there? That within social studies of science, it's completely valid to study the effect of Forbidden Archaeology and its impact.
Yeah.
But that means it's making an impact. It's not some cartoon thing which no one cares about. It's substantial.
Yeah. So we kind of cooperated with them, and they wrote a 23-page review article about the book. Now, when an academic, publishes a book, many times it won't get any response at all. A few get mentioned a lot or reviewed a lot, but not all of them. And Forbidden Archaeology got huge reviews. And they weren't necessarily positive endorsements, but they acknowledged certain things and began to mention certain things that made us a presence in those circles, part of the discourse. Because if you're going to change people's minds, you have to be able to communicate with them in their circle of communication. So, and they were mentioning things about, the Bhaktivedanta Institute and the boldness of its intellectual program and the Vedic perspective that was given in the book is something new and unexpected, and it's good to have things like that on record. That you're making a new contribution to the field. You have a bold intellectual program. They mentioned Srila Prabhupada, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, the Puranic view of human origins and things like that. And that's just one example. There were dozens of reviews. And I don't want to exaggerate it, but it was, in my mind at least, it was historic because we hadn't been mentioned at all in these circles. I mean, who knew that the International Society for Krishna Consciousness had a position on evolution or human antiquity or anything?
Well, some scholars of religion or Indology might have said that they say like this, but not really a position, not in their terms of being an academic position. So some people might have thought, it's just like this. The young Earth creationists, they have a position, or they don't take it seriously. Well, I guess to some extent they do take young Earth and creationists seriously because they do talk about them, right? They have their science. That's another very interesting point, because it seems that not everyone, there's so many positions which seem pretty wacko, but they all have scientists to back up. Young Earth creationists believe the Earth was created between 6,000, 10,000 years ago. Or some bishop in the 19th century gave, but they have all science to back it up, apparently. And then flat Earth, they have their science to back it up, and all kinds of things. They have scientists, regular. Any comment on that?
Well, I don't know that. Well, let me, if we're talking about the young Earth creationists, what I was referring to is they were a little bit familiar with opposition to evolution coming from Christian sources.
I think I'll just qualify my own statement there, because that is a bit different. That is prominent because of religious fanaticism, especially in America, of biblical fundamentalists. It's not come to public attention because of a scientific stance. So
Yeah.
there is a major difference there. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anybody from that movement was invited to make a presentation at the Royal Institution
Yeah,
in
yeah.
London. You know, so, but it's interesting, even the young earth Christian creationists, they had good things to say about forbidden archaeology. Even though we're talking about time spans of billions and billions of years, and they're talking about 10,000 years. So I guess sometimes when you're dealing with different groups that have different positions, if you have an overlap in one area, you know.
Both against the orthodoxy.
Yeah. And we'll just have to disagree about the age of the earth and
But we have the same
later.
enemy, right?
Yeah, I mean, those are the kinds of decisions that people involved in these things have to make. But I have been invited on Christian radio shows and TV shows. Not so much recently, but when the book first came out.
You wrote a book about forbidden archaeology's impact, and one of the reviews you highlighted was, I believe, is from a Danish professor saying this is just complete humbug and nonsense, and some people believe this, but what can you do? It's their evolutionary outcome. It was just so dismissive that it showed he was really upset. That was one of the reviews you published on the front cover of that book. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I did have a strategy when I was doing the research and writing for forbidden archaeology, because I figured if I'm going to spend all this time doing this research and writing, I would like it to have some impact, some effect. So I had thought, we'll put out that book, and the 900-page book, well documented, everything done according to an academic standard, and release that to the scientific world. Send it to their journals for review. If I mentioned a scientist's work, a living scientist's work, send him a review copy of it. And and then I understood it would attract negative commentary and also some positive things.
Oh,
as well.
yeah, there was a whole bunch of quotes from positive reviews, and then there was one just ranting, and you could see the contrast.
Yes, and then my idea was, and I had thought this all out, even before the book was printed, that after those reviews came in, the positive and the negative, use both of them to promote a paperback edition, 300 pages, an abridged edition of the book called The Hidden History of the Human Race. And then that would be directed to the general public, the media, radio, television, like that. And then I envisioned
Very intelligent.
that it would be translated into dozens of languages, and that we would do lectures and interviews about it from the publicity that was generated. And And then the final thing that I envisioned was a Hollywood film based on it, or a series of films. Everything happened according to plan, except Krishna wouldn't give me the Hollywood film. So still time. But I look at it as Krishna knows me, he knows what I can handle, and still remain a devotee. Give him too much, he'll get deviated.
So you exploded the bomb, and you went on bombing all over the universities all over the world, and the ripples are still going on, or more than ripples. How do you see the future of the? Is this going to be? What's going to be the effect? The orthodoxy still promotes their line or lines, but it's more or less basically the same line, and there's this alternative science, of which ancient human antiquity is one strand of it. What do you see the future for this, and how can that affect the spreading of Krishna consciousness and the Vedic knowledge becoming accepted more widely?
Well, I see that the world is undergoing what I would call a fundamental renegotiation of its understanding of reality. Like when I began writing Forbidden Archeology, in the scientific world, there wasn't very much interest in the study of consciousness, because they figured, what's that consciousness? Everything is matter. You know, that was their idea. But now there's a whole new generation of scientists, even in the mainstream circles, that are investigating out-of-body experiences, reincarnation memories, all kinds of things related to consciousness. And they're admitting that they don't have any real explanation for these things. So in that way, I think there's an opening for us to enter into that field and give them something that will allow them to understand and explain these things. But the situation in the world is such that people are losing their faith in what's coming to them through the official channels. And it's a situation, I'm kind of reminded of the fall of communism, that kind of right up to the last moment, the communists were in charge. They still had their police apparatus and military apparatus, but their own citizens were kind of against them. They had a different idea. Even among some of their own leaders, they had a different idea. And at a certain moment, even though they were trying to maintain power right up to the very end, it was such an unstable situation that just one or two little things resulted in a kind of a phased transition, you know, where the whole thing shifted, and suddenly all of these countries like Poland and Czech Republic,
USSR fell apart. Gorbachev, he
Estonia,
peacefully
Latvia,
dismantled
Lithuania, Bulgaria, just Hungary.
Partly overnight, wasn't it?
Overnight.
Yeah.
It shifted. So in one sense, I kind of see what I would call the physicalist or materialist scientific establishment is in a similar position where although they control the education system, they have a lot of control over the media. Not complete, but they exercise a lot of influence. And but it's a very unstable situation for them because vast numbers of the ordinary people have ideas different than what they're promoting. And even among some of their own people, there are people who are expressing other ideas. So I think there is going to come a time when that unstable situation that they're in, where they're kind of officially in control, but there's so many alternative forms of communication, which, the internet, but people are still dealing with that, how much they're going to allow that to remain an open channel of communication. But anyways, it seems to be like a situation, as I said, I kind of compare it to the last days of communism. I think that's the kind of state we're in now, that just some little thing, apparently little thing, will kind of result in a major shift where, when I was writing Forbidden Archaeology, I couldn't even imagine I'd be lecturing in Moscow and St. Petersburg and Vladivostok.
It was the Iron Curtain, right?
Yeah. I'd be speaking against Darwin in the Darwin Museum in Moscow. It was pretty amazing. So changes like that can happen, and I kind of see that a similar situation is now kind of developing in the world, where people have ideas that are different and they're coming from the orthodoxy, and the orthodoxy, even its own members, some of them are kind of wandering off the reservation, and they, so that's one reason I personally try to stay in touch with all the various groups that I think are part of this fundamental renegotiation of our understanding of ourselves, our place in the cosmos, and things like that. That includes the mainstream scientists. They're going to have to be part of whatever change takes place. The alternative scientists, alternative science people, different spiritual and religious groups, different segments of the general public, the UFO people, conspiracy people. There are a lot of different parties to this, what I call renegotiation. And I think it's good that we stay in touch with them all, where we have overlapping concerns. But I think ultimately, like the kind of thing that you're doing, where you're going to be, like we heard last night, developing the newly to be acquired farm.
This morning, was it?
Well, it's not just a farm, it'll be a cultural center or something. It's not, I don't think you're acquiring it simply to get fruits and vegetables. I think there must be some larger purpose behind it regarding social transformation, I think. I guess. Yeah. So, and that's very important, to give people real alternatives, real options, and then by some combination of world events or outreach activities that we may make, people will begin to narrow down their options until finally there's only one option left.
Well, there'll always be all kinds of bogus things, but for those who are sincere, they can take this. You were saying about consciousness studies being, it's a whole field, and there's conferences and everything. But what I'm seeing, and I don't get into it that much, but I also keep my eyes on all kinds of things going on, is that it's come at least to the periphery of orthodox science, but that's been possible by sticking to the scientist, or that means scientism, the dogma of scientism, that we only accept anything which is material. So we don't accept any supernatural or spirit, and our whole understanding of consciousness, or Bhagavad Gita understanding of consciousness, says that it's a different energy altogether. Aparayamitastvanyang prakritim vidhime, it's different to matter. But they have so many different theories because they're trying to explain it in terms of matter, which is impossible. And that's also why there's so many different cosmological theories, and they're all trying to avoid the fact that there's a supreme designer and controller. So that basic, stubborn, atheistic, materialistic, moghasha mogha karma, Prabhupada translated, they're attracted by demoniac and atheistic views. So this science is one thing and showing, but you can't wake up someone who's pretending to be asleep, and the orthodoxy is very, very committedly asleep. We won't. What was that? At the Bhakti Swarup Damodar Maharaj said he went to some conference, this was years ago, about the origins of the universe. And at the very beginning it was stated, one thing we want to make clear right now is that we're not going to discuss, even theoretically, any supernatural causes. So that's called scientism, where you begin with or scientific materialism. You accept on faith, it's not provable, and there's plenty of apparent evidence to the contrary, that there's nothing beyond matter, and also that anything which we can't measure or understand with our brains cannot exist, which is really stupid. To think that we tiny little beings on this tiny little planet with our tiny little intelligence and our very limited sensory abilities, and we will say what is reality. Everything within reality can be circumscribed within what man is the measure of all things. So we should attack this. That demoniac atheistic outlook. You can bring science, but that basic demoniac outlook of the scissors people, right? They're not going to accept.
You're correct, Maharaj, that the dominant view among scientists is that matter is the only thing that exists. There's nothing beyond that. However, there is a school of thought among scientists. They call it dual aspect monism. That matter exists, but a feature of matter is that it's conscious also. Consciousness is...
Yeah, some of them even say we can accept reincarnation, we can explain it by... And then they go into it's all matter, right? Anything to avoid the soul. One possible explanation of it may be true of reincarnation, but it's all within matter. That's what... And then they'll accuse of vitalism, right? Vitalism.
Yes.
Anything which, if you try to introduce, there was a theory called vitalism. When did that come out? Late 19th century?
Yes, early 20th century.
That there's a vital force, and then that's just rejected. There's anything which looks like that, that's rejected as vital. It's an out-of-date, bogus theory. So it's actually very demoniac what we're up against.
One thing that they're struggling with, some of the scientists involved in consciousness research, except there is a thing called consciousness. Some of them, as I said, try to say, well, consciousness on a very deep level is a feature of matter. They try to get around it that way. But others, if they think there is something conscious, they take a very impersonalist view of it.
That's the thing, yeah.
That there's one undifferentiated conscious self. So...
Tower physics.
So I heard a talk by a supporter of that idea, and he was saying, but we have a big problem. Although consciousness is one, we all experience our individual consciousness with its limits.
That's the next thing. If you do step into transcendence, then because of deep-rooted envy of Krishna, the last snare of Maya, and then you get into this impersonalism, which it's another way of avoiding Krishna. This Aldous Huxley wrote this book, The Perennial Philosophy, in which he analyzed all over the world. There are people who experience the oneness of everything, and this is the real thing, but it's not. That's the next. And even I'm saying we have to promote reincarnation. It's a fact, but even if it's accepted as a fact, the next thing it'll be taken as Buddhism, because the tendency to avoid Krishna is so deep in the condition, the envy of Krishna.
Yes. I mean, they go to...
So science, through science bringing all these things out, that's one step, but the really deep anartha that we're dealing with is envy of Krishna.
Yeah, in order for there to be service to Krishna, there has to be a servant. And
yeah, otherwise you do all this stuff and then it gets taken over by New Age Buddhism and all this kind of thing. Buddhism became very popular. It was fashionable at one time. I think it's dying down a bit now, but you can be spiritual with no commitment whatsoever. And at least the way actual Buddhism, you hit some. If you want to be a Buddhist monk, is far more. They say Krishna life is strict, but real Buddhism, the monks, not all of them. Some of them are really bogus, but they're really very austere and very seriously practicing. But they won't accept Krishna, that's for sure. Or they'll take him into their scheme. Just like in Hinduism, yeah, Krishna's there, but he's not the supreme. Or even the Mayavadis will say Vishnu is supreme. They'll say that, but subordinated within the overarching idea that we're all one. Very, very dangerous, this Mayavadan Buddhism. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarne. We don't realize how bad it is. Prabhupada knew. Hare Krishna. I said, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for coming here and for your lifelong service in Srila Prabhupada's mission and taking up this important service of, as Srila Prabhupada wanted, speaking in the scientist's language, in taking their own tools. Srila Prabhupada said this. He wanted the Bhaktivedanta Institute to do this. That he's saying that they can't make life from life, and what they're saying is bogus, but he said, they won't accept me. You have to have scientists, you have to speak to them in their own language. Then you have to convince them. So you've done that.
May I make one comment and then I'll cease? You were bringing up the Mayavadis and the Buddhists and things. So it's the same thing playing out today. Those different philosophical positions, nirvana, voidism, materialism, under different names perhaps, and sometimes under the same names. But Lord Chaitanya, when he toured South India, it said he met, representatives of all these different positions. And using their methods, like when he met the Buddhists, he had discussions with them. The Buddhists didn't accept Shabda Praman. So I said, okay, you just want sense evidence and logic? I'll show you, And Krishnadas Kaviraj said, in this way, Lord Chaitanya traveled all over South India, meeting representatives of different philosophical groups and defeating them, establishing the supremacy of his view of things. And in his purport, Srila Prabhupada said, all the members of the Krishna conscious movement should do the same thing when they confront any idea that they should be able to show the superiority of Lord Chaitanya's view of things. So it's a tall order.
To emulate Lord Chaitanya. That's Prabhupada's order. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
And now it's time for Gaura Arati. Hare Krishna, thank you. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Gaurangera rotik shobha, Jagajana mana lobha,